We're going to reward all of you who came on time by starting on time. Let's all stand and sing, "Oh Freedom." And I invite you to remain standing, and as the Kowalskis light our chalice, let us say our covenant together. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart. Please be seated. Well, good morning, and if you're visiting us here for the first time, I'd like to extend a special welcome. It's good to have you at our service, and I invite you to stay after the service for coffee hour. My name is Roger Fritz. I'm the interim minister here for a year to provide a space between the former settled minister, who was here 16 years, and the new settled minister, who will probably be selected next year. It's good to have all of you here today, and if you're viewing this service on Zoom, please remember that you can activate closed captioning, and it will try to explain what in writing what I say. And if you'd like to talk with others after the service, there will be a virtual coffee hour where you get to have conversations on Zoom. Just stay on, and you'll be invited into a breakout room. If you are attending in person, those of you who are here, I invite you all to join us for coffee hour after the service. This is a special Sunday. Instead of what we in the clergy call the hymn, sermon, sandwich, hymn, sermon, hymn, the sermon is the meat and the hymns are the bread, the hymn, sermon, sandwich. Instead of doing that, we're going to have a children's story, and then we're going to invite you to circulate in the building among various activities which are listed in the order of service, and we'll tell you more about that in a minute. But if you're here for the first time, we don't do this every Sunday. This occurs on rare occasions like today to break things up a little bit. Let's remain seated and join in singing our centering song.
Amen.
Now, some churches have a tradition of lighting votive lights, candles and things like that. We have a similar tradition, but it doesn't involve fire. It involves water and stones. Each Sunday we gather in community, carrying whatever emotions that we experience. We may be full of joy for something wonderful that's happened, or sorrow as we've lost something important in our lives. And we honor those feelings by dropping stones in this bowl of water. Just as the stones are held by the water, so are all who drop them held in love by this community. So I invite you to go down the center aisle and come over here and form a line and return down the center aisle. All of you are invited to join in this ritual. Of course, you don't have to if you don't want to. And those online can join us by entering joys and sorrow in the chat. I drop a final stone for the joys and sorrows held by those online and for those who are unable to be with us today. Let's be together for a moment in prayer and meditation. We are amazingly alive today and present with one another. May our time together renew our hope. May the stories we share refresh our courage. May the songs we sing lift our spirits. May the words we speak invigorate us. May the touch of hands, the sound of laughter, the sight of old faces and new, restore us in faith. Amen. Let's remain seated and join in singing Spirit of Life. governing and financial support is provided by the voluntary generosity of our members and our friends. So to this end, we have an offering to sustain the work of this beloved community. Once upon a time, most folks used the offering plate to fulfill their pledges of financial support, but we're now in a new century, and you can text your donation to the number provided on the screen. Thank you. Our time for all ages this morning is a storybook written by Christine King Ferris, the sister of Dr. Martin Luther King. It's a book about her childhood. She said, "This book is written as an accurate reflection of the childhood experiences of my brother Martin, the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Although many stories have been told about Martin's childhood, this one is firsthand by his sister. As the sole survivor of the family into which Martin Luther King Jr. was born, I feel it's important to share some true, funny, intriguing elements of Martin's early days. No other document can share this true story. Many see Martin as a very serious-minded individual, stiff-necked and always focused. What has not been emphasized enough is that Martin was once a boy. He, like others, developed gradually. He was funny. He was curious. He liked to play. He was a regular fellow. I owe it to him to tell the full story. We had a great time together as kids. We were born in the same room, my brother and I. I was an early baby, born sooner than expected. Mother, dear, and Daddy placed me in the clothing drawer that stood in the corner of their upstairs bedroom. I got a crib a few days afterwards. A year and a half later, Martin spent his first night in that hand-me-down crib in the very same room. The house where we were born belonged to Mother's parents, our grandparents, the Reverend and Mrs. A.D. Williams. We lived there with them and our Aunt Ida, our grandmother's sister. And not long after my brother Martin, who we called ML because he and Daddy had the same name, after he was born, our baby brother was born. His name was Alfred Daniel, but we called him A.D. after our grandfather. They called me Christine, and like 3 peas in one pod, we grew together. Our days and rooms were filled with adventure stories, with tinker toys, with dolls and Monopoly and Chinese checkers. And although Daddy, who was an important minister, and Mother Dear, who was known far and wide as a musician, often had work that took them away from home, our grandmother was always there to take care of us. I remember days sitting at her feet as she and Aunt Ida filled us with grand memories of their childhood and read to us about all the wonderful places in the world. And of course, my brothers and I had each other. We 3 stuck together like pages in a brand new book. And being normal young children, we were almost always up to something. Our best prank involved a fur piece that belonged to our grandmother. It looked almost alive with its tiny feet and little head and gleaming glass eyes. So every once in a while, in the waning light of the evening, we'd tie the fur piece to a stick and hide behind the hedge in front of our house, and we would dangle it in front of an unsuspecting passerby. Boy, you could hear the screams of fright all across the neighborhood. There was a time Mother Dear decided that her children should all learn to play the piano. I didn't mind too much, but ML and AD preferred being outside to being stuck inside with our piano teacher, Mr. Mann, who would rap your knuckles with a ruler just for playing the wrong notes. Well, one morning, ML and AD decided to loosen the legs on the piano bench so we wouldn't have to practice. We didn't tell Mr. Mann, and when he sat, crash, down he went. But mostly, we were good, obedient children, and ML did learn to play a few songs on the piano. He even went off to sing with our mother a time or two. Given his love for singing and music, I'm sure he could have become as good a musician as our mother, and had his life not called him down a different path. But that's just what his life did. My brothers and I grew up a long time ago, back in a time when certain places in our country had unfair laws that said it was right to keep black people separate because our skin was darker, and our ancestors had been captured in far-off Africa and brought to America as slaves. Atlanta, Georgia, the city in which we were growing up, had those laws. Because of those laws, my family rarely went to the picture shows, to the movies, or visited Grant Park with its famous cyclorama. In fact, to this very day, I don't recall ever seeing my father on a streetcar. Because of those laws and the indignity that went with them, Daddy preferred keeping ML, AD, and me close to home, where we'd be protected. We lived in a neighborhood in Atlanta that's now called Sweet Auburn. It was named for Auburn Avenue, the street that ran in front of our house. On our side of the street stood two-story frame houses similar to the one we lived in. Across it crouched a line of one-story row houses and a store owned by a white family. When we were young, all the children along Auburn Avenue played together, even the two boys whose parents owned the store. And since our house was a favorite gathering place, those boys played with us in our backyard and ran with ML and AD to the firehouse on the corner where they watched the engines and the firemen. The thought of not playing with these kids because they were different, because they were white and we were black, it never entered our minds. Well, one day, ML and AD went to get their playmates from across the street just as they had done hundreds of times before. But they came home alone. The boys had told my brothers that they couldn't play together anymore because AD and ML were Negroes, and that was it. Shortly afterward, the family sold the store and moved away. We never saw or heard from them again. Looking back, I realized that it was only a matter of time before the generations of cruelty and injustice that Daddy and Mother Dear and Mama and Aunt Ida had been shielding us from finally broke through. But back then, it was a crushing blow that seemed to come out of nowhere. Why do white people treat colored people so mean? ML asked Mother Dear afterward. And with me and ML and AD standing in front of her trying our best to understand, Mother Dear gave the reason behind it all. Her words explained the streetcars our family avoided and the whites only sign that kept us off the elevator at City Hall. Her words told why there were parks and museums that black people could not visit, and why some restaurants refused to serve us, and why hotels wouldn't give us rooms, and why theaters would only allow us to watch their picture shows from the balcony. But her words also gave us hope. She answered simply, because they just don't understand that everyone is the same, but someday it will be better. And my brother ML looked up into my mother's face and said the words I remember to this day. He said, "Mother dear, one day I'm going to turn the world upside down." In the coming years, there would be other reminders of the cruel system called segregation that sought to keep black people down. But it was Daddy who showed ML and AD and me how to speak out against hatred and bigotry and stand up for what is right. Daddy was the minister at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And after losing our playmates, when ML, AD, and I heard our father speak from his pulpit, his words held new meaning. And Daddy practiced what he preached. He always stood up for himself when confronted with hatred and bigotry. And each day he shared his encounters at the dinner table. When a shoe salesman told Daddy and ML that he only served them in the back of the store because they were black, Dad took ML somewhere else to buy new shoes. Another time, a police officer pulled Daddy over and called him boy. Daddy pointed to ML sitting next to him in the car and said, "This is a boy. I am a man, and until you call me one, I will not listen to you." These stories were as nourishing as the food that was set before us. Years would pass, and many new lessons would be learned. There would be numerous speeches and marches and prizes, but my brother never forgot the example of our father or the promise he had made to our mother on the day his friends turned him away. Robert. John Davis is available somewhere. There he is. He will tell us about the workshops you're about to be invited to attend. John?
Thank you, Reverend Roger. And before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone who made this possible. Everyone on the staff, Leah, who's pretty much set everything up for today, Bob, who'll be leading the workshop, Megan and Chrissy, and Reverend Roger. The purpose of today's workshops and activities are to mark tomorrow, Dr. Martin Luther King Day, which is a day of service. So in this way, we are going to do our small part in serving our larger community. There are a variety of workshops and activities for both adults and children. I'd like, and yes, if you look in your order of service, you'll see most of these activities and where they're located. However, there is one activity that was left off the list. This is an activity, it's a workshop actually, an introduction to a workshop on Ibram X. Kendi's How to Raise an Anti-Racist. So I'll say this slowly. In the McLennan room, Lana and Kathy will be leading this introduction to this workshop that is going to be offered to parents, caregivers, teachers, anyone who interacts with children on a daily basis and would like to learn how to better raise their children as anti-racists. So if you are interested in this workshop is available in McLennan. If you're watching on Zoom, hello, and this workshop will also be available on Zoom. I'll introduce the other workshops that are listed in the order of service. Right here in the sanctuary, Bob Rowland will be leading a pop-up choir. There's Bob. Going to sing Lean On Me. In the youth room, Bill Clinton and Neil Goldstein will be leading a workshop, UU Justice PA, and how it relates to Unitarian Universalist values. Downstairs, in the Owl Nest room, there'll be a table where children can make fridge magnets for messages about bringing food in for the Media Food Bank, to recycle, things like that. Also downstairs in the chapel, there'll be a table set up for children to make posters. Again, these posters will relate to the coat drive that's going on right now. They'll be hung up, these posters will be hung up around the church building. And then also downstairs in the lower level hallway, there's an opportunity for children and adults to make a civil rights timeline and to receive a calendar that has significant events in civil rights history on the calendar. And I believe that's it. So the workshops will last between 15 and 20 minutes. I will probably come around at some point and let people know that the time has ended. At that point, I haven't cleared it with Bob, but I believe the pop-up choir will sing Lean On Me, and you're all welcome to join in. So you are free to go to these various workshops. And again, the workshop on how to be an anti-racist is in the McLennan room. Thank you.
Planning Committee for the Great 1963 March on Washington scheduled no women speakers during the entire 3-hour program. But the planners did invite women to sing. Josephine Baker, Marian Anderson, and finally, Mahalia Jackson. A cappella, Mahalia Jackson sang a spiritual born of the slave experience as people in the crowd cried. This is why Mahalia Jackson was on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial behind Dr. King when he rose to speak 2.5 hours into the program. The plan was for Martin Luther King to speak for 8 minutes. He had written a manuscript and he stuck to the text for 12 minutes. It was a good but not a great sermon. Standing behind him, Mahalia Jackson sensed this. She had heard him give another sermon on other occasions, and she knew its power. By late 1963, the phrase, "I have a dream," had become a fixture in sermons he frequently gave as he traveled the United States. So Mahalia Jackson shouted, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." Reverend King heard her and followed her advice. At that moment, he left his prepared manuscript behind and he improvised the next section of the speech, about 5 minutes. Let's listen.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Years ago, a great American whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as the red beacon light approached the millions of Negro slaves who had been killed in the flames of withering injustice. It came at the glorious daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on the lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity.
So that was the beginning. Now we go to the 12-minute part.
I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face difficulties It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live up to its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Let's stand and sing "We Shall Overcome." As I extinguish the chalice, let's join in our closing words. For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. And for those who come to seek path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. Blessed be. That concludes our service.